It was a calm Tuesday morning when the Bennett family prepared to return home from a long-anticipated holiday. The first rays of sunlight bathed Northcrest International Airport in a warm golden glow as the terminal buzzed with life. Families hugged goodbye, luggage wheels clicked against the polished floors, and distant boarding calls echoed overhead. At the heart of the bustle walked Liam Bennett, a bright-eyed 12-year-old whose steps held more purpose than most. Between his parents, Ethan and Claire, he clutched a small, silver model airplane, a keepsake that rarely left his hand. His gaze locked onto the mammoth jetliner outside the tall glass windows, eyes lighting up with quiet awe. For Liam, planes weren't just machines. They were magic. A marvel he'd studied, admired, and dreamed about since he could remember. He was their only child, a boy full of curiosity and intellect beyond his years. While other kids spent afternoons on video games or cartoons, Liam devoured flight manuals like novels. He watched cockpit footage and aviation tutorials on loop, and spent hours mastering flight simulators on a top-tier rig his dad had finally agreed to buy after months of persuasion. Flying wasn't a hobby for Liam, it was his calling. His parents supported his fascination, even as it deepened into obsession. Ethan, a quiet man with a practical mind, had once admitted to Claire that he wished their son spent more time climbing trees or riding bikes like other boys his age. Claire had just smiled and said, Liam was born for something higher. As they navigated through the bustling crowd of Gate 42, Liam's excitement was hard to miss. His eyes were fixed on the aircraft they'd soon board, a sleek, powerful jet with a curved nose and massive wings. The moment he spotted it, he whispered to his father, "That's a Vesper Air 990. You can tell by the double-deck hump and the engine placement." Ethan chuckled. "Already naming the plane, huh?" "It's more than that," Liam said eagerly. "This one can carry over 850,000 pounds at takeoff and cruise at 580 miles per hour. "You're a walking flight manual," Ethan said, tousling his son's hair. They moved forward in line, and a cheerful flight attendant greeted them at the boarding door. Her name tag read Sophie. She bent down slightly, smiling warmly at Liam. "Good morning. Welcome aboard." Liam's eyes flicked instantly to her uniform. 2 gold stripes. "You're the lead attendant, right?" Sophie blinked in surprise. "That's right. How'd you know? 2 stripes usually mean you've been flying at least 5 years, Liam replied, matter-of-factly. She laughed. "Well, aren't you observant?" "I'm going to be a pilot," Liam said with a firm nod. Sophie leaned in, her tone playful but sincere. "I don't doubt it for a second." She gestured toward the cabin. "Want to guess what kind of bird you're on today?" Liam studied the ceiling panels, the layout, the spacing between rows. "Vesper Air 990, Max," he said after a beat. "Based on the cabin configuration and materials, it's the latest series." Sophie blinked, impressed. "Most pilots don't even get that right." Claire gave a polite smile, but Ethan's expression faltered for a moment. There was always a part of him that worried. Worried Liam spent too much time in a world 30,000 feet above them. They settled into their seats, row 16, center section. Liam sat between his parents, still gripping his toy jet. His sharp gaze wandered across the cabin, noting the precise order of the crew's safety checks, the barely audible hum of the auxiliary power unit, and the pitch of the engines as they began spooling up. "You nervous, champ?" Ethan asked, pulling the seatbelt snug across his waist. Liam shook his head without hesitation. "Not at all. The 990 series is among the safest ever built. Besides, I've reviewed dozens of emergency procedures. I'd know what to do." Ethan chuckled, both proud and slightly unnerved. "Let's hope you never need to use any of that knowledge." "I hope you never actually have to use any of that flight knowledge," Ethan chuckled, giving his son a playful nudge. The engines whirred louder as the aircraft slowly began taxiing onto the runway. Liam leaned into the window, eyes wide and sparkling. His heart beat faster with every second. He could feel the vibration of the engines, the Stellar Jet X300s, each generating more than 66,000 pounds of thrust, powerful enough to lift the immense body of the aircraft effortlessly. The jet surged forward, wheels thundering rhythmically beneath them as it raced down the strip. Then, with a forceful rise, the nose tilted upward, and the world outside the window began to fall away. They were airborne. As they climbed above the clouds, Liam's face reflected pure exhilaration. His parents sat on either side of him, their hands resting calmly in their laps, unaware of how vivid the moment was for their son. Once the plane leveled out at cruising altitude, Sophie returned to their row, pushing a cart of snacks and refreshments. She handed out drinks, then smiled at Liam, who was already gearing up for another aviation fact drop. Did you know the 990 MAX has a wingspan of 224 feet and 7 inches? Liam asked without hesitation. Sophie raised an eyebrow. You're going to put me out of a job with trivia like that. Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. He's been rattling off plane facts since he was in diapers. Well, Sophie replied with a grin. Sounds like someone's ready for the cockpit. Liam's smile faded slightly, replaced by something deeper, calm, serious. I could do it, if I had to. Her grin softened into something more curious than amused. Sophie studied his expression. There was no ego in his voice, just quiet, unsettling certainty. Ethan leaned over with a smile. Maybe one day you'll be flying us to Coral Bay. Liam glanced at him. Could be sooner than you think. Claire gave her son a look, gentle, but touched with unease. It wasn't just what he said, but how he said it, as if the idea wasn't distant or dreamy, but close, possible, imminent. Before she could dwell on the thought, the captain's voice came across the intercom, smooth and composed. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Donovan speaking. We've reached our cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. It's clear skies ahead all the way to Halston City. Sit back, relax, and enjoy your flight. Liam closed his eyes and let the low hum of the engines sink into his bones. In his mind, he was already there, in the cockpit, his hands gripping the yoke, his eyes scanning the panels. He could feel it all, adjusting altitude, managing thrust, compensating for weather shifts. It wasn't fantasy to him, it was training. The plane dipped gently into a pocket of turbulence. Gasps rose from a few rows behind them, but Liam barely flinched. He could guess the wind speed just by the rhythm of the bumps. Sophie passed by again and noticed him unbothered. You okay, Captain? She asked lightly. Liam nodded. This model can handle worse. It's built for stability. Sophie laughed again. You're a natural. Claire leaned in and brushed Liam's bangs back from his forehead. Maybe it wouldn't hurt to try a different hobby for a while, something that doesn't fly. Liam's expression darkened slightly. This is what I love. Ethan slipped an arm around him. And we're proud of you, buddy. Liam turned his head back toward the window, watching the clouds drift below like waves. In his mind, he returned to the pilot's seat, his feet on the rudder pedals, his fingers adjusting trim. Flying was the only place he felt completely in control. Then, without warning, the plane lurched violently. Overhead bins rattled. Cabin lights flickered. A collective gasp rippled through the cabin as the aircraft tilted slightly to one side. Sophie appeared again, rushing from the galley, her face noticeably paler. She made a direct line for the cockpit, but froze as a voice, shaky and strained, crackled over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some unexpected technical issues. Please remain seated and keep your seatbelts fastened. Liam's eyes narrowed. Something wasn't right. The pitch of the engines had changed. He could hear it, and he saw it too. The flight attendants glancing anxiously at each other, whispering beneath their breath. A tremor shook the plane again, more aggressive this time. A baby cried somewhere near the back. Claire and Ethan both sat up, now gripping the arms of their seats tightly. Liam's jaw clenched. He knew that sound. He knew that vibration. This wasn't just turbulence. He recognized the pattern of engine stutter and the signs of hydraulic pressure loss. He'd read about it, simulated it, prepared for it. This was something worse. From his window seat, Liam continued observing the aircraft with a quiet intensity that only he understood. The wing flaps were adjusting, and he'd been mentally calculating airspeed and pressure just for fun. That's what made flying so beautiful to him. It wasn't just a thrill, it was a puzzle he loved solving. Ethan nudged him gently. "All right, Captain Bennett. What's our altitude?" Without missing a beat, Liam replied, 30,000 feet. Cruising speed's about 540 miles per hour. Ethan laughed, shaking his head. "One day, kiddo." Liam glanced sideways, lips curling into a small, knowing smile. "Maybe sooner than you think." And then it happened. A sudden, thunderous jolt rattled the plane. A deafening bang echoed through the cabin as the aircraft violently veered left. Passengers screamed. Loose items flew down the aisles. Bags burst from the overhead bins and crashed to the floor. "What on earth was that?" Ethan shouted, his hand flying to Liam's shoulder. Before anyone could react, another tremor surged through the plane, stronger this time. With a mechanical hiss, oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling, swaying like pendulums. The lights flickered and dimmed, casting eerie shadows over pale, stunned faces. A baby wailed from the back. Shouts erupted. Panic set in. The captain's voice crackled through the intercom, distorted and tense. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your—" The voice faltered, strained. "We are experiencing—" Then, silence. The line cut off. Chaos swept through the cabin like wildfire. Passengers shouted over one another. A woman sobbed uncontrollably. A man in a business suit fumbled with his mask, looking completely helpless. The flight attendants scrambled down the aisles, trying to maintain order, but even their voices betrayed fear. Liam's heart pounded in his chest as he felt the subtle but unmistakable dip in the plane's nose. The engines beneath the wings roared unevenly. He didn't need confirmation. He already knew. The aircraft was losing altitude, fast. Sophie, the lead flight attendant, rushed from the galley toward the cockpit. Her face was ghost pale. Liam's sharp eyes followed her, narrowing. He could feel it, the change in pressure, the shift in pitch. This wasn't turbulence. This was a full-blown system failure. Moments later, Sophie reappeared. She was gripping a seatback for balance. Her expression had crumbled into something close to panic. "Please remain calm," she called out, her voice cracking at the edges. She turned to another crew member and began whispering urgently. Liam didn't hesitate. He unbuckled his seatbelt. Claire reached for him instinctively. "Liam, no!" "Stay here." But he was already standing. His eyes were locked on Sophie. He crossed the aisle in long, sure steps and stopped in front of her. "What's going on?" he asked. His voice was steady, unnaturally so for a 12-year-old. Sophie blinked in disbelief. "Liam, now's not— Please," he said, firmer this time. "Tell me." Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again. She glanced around and then leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The captain suffered a heart attack," she said, "and the co-pilot, he's unconscious." Liam's blood turned to ice. His mind kicked into high gear. "Who's flying the plane?" Sophie didn't answer. She didn't have to. Gasps rose again from passengers who had overheard. A man yelled for a doctor. A woman clutched a rosary, mumbling frantic prayers. From his seat, Ethan reached out toward his son. "Liam, come back." But Liam stood his ground. His thoughts were already calculating possibilities. Timelines, altitudes, fuel. He didn't even hesitate. "I can help," he said. Sophie's eyes widened. "Liam, no! This is real." "I know it's real," he replied calmly. "I've studied this aircraft's control systems. I've flown simulations. I know what to do." "You're 12. she whispered, her voice breaking. Liam looked up at her with eyes that had seen thousands of virtual cockpit hours. And I may be the only one here who knows how to handle this jet. A second flight attendant nearby leaned closer. He's kidding. Right? Liam ignored the comment. He took a step forward, locking eyes with Sophie. Right now, autopilot is trying to compensate for the descent. But if the hydraulics are down, it won't hold. You'll need to control pitch and throttle manually, or we'll stall. Sophie stared at him as if she were seeing someone completely new. A stranger with the voice of a seasoned pilot. "How do you know that?" she whispered. "I read flight manuals," he answered, "and I've practiced every kind of emergency landing scenario, hundreds of times." Ethan finally stood, approaching quickly. His face had lost all color. "Liam, no. This is insane." Liam didn't flinch. "Dad, do you have a better idea?" That question hung in the air like a thundercloud. Sophie stood frozen. Her hands trembled slightly. Around them, the plane gave another ominous shudder. A beat passed. Then she nodded. "Follow me," she said quietly. Ethan's hand shot out and wrapped around Liam's wrist. "No, Liam, no." But Liam turned to face his father, his eyes calm, unshakably serious. "Dad, I can do this." Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but no words came. He had never seen that look on his son's face. It wasn't defiance, it was conviction. From her seat, Claire whispered through trembling lips, "Go. Please, save us." Liam gave a small nod and followed Sophie toward the cockpit. His heart pounded like a drum inside his chest, but his thoughts were razor sharp. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind 100 times. Only this time, it wasn't a simulation. Sophie swung open the cockpit door. The sight hit Liam like a wave. Captain Donovan was slumped over the controls, his face ghostly pale, drenched in sweat. The co-pilot was unresponsive, head drooping awkwardly against the instrument panel. Alarms blinked and beeped, warning lights flashing across the dashboard. The yoke trembled as the aircraft dove ever deeper. Without hesitating, Liam slid into the captain's seat. His small hands grasped the trembling yoke. First, he adjusted the seat until his feet reached the rudder pedals. Then his fingers skimmed across the dials, remembering the layout from countless hours spent in flight simulators. "Thrust first," he whispered to himself. Sophie stood behind him, visibly shaken. "Liam, are you sure?" "If we drop much lower," he interrupted, "the pressure loss will tear the fuselage apart." He eased the throttle forward and gently adjusted the yoke angle. The plane groaned under the change, fighting back against gravity's pull. Liam clenched his jaw and reached for the elevator trim. Slowly, the nose of the plane began to rise. It wasn't smooth, but it was working. Then static buzzed through the cockpit radio. "Flight 237. This is Hawthorne Air Control. We're reading an emergency descent on your radar. Please respond." Liam leaned toward the mic. "This is Liam Bennett, acting captain. We've had a medical emergency. The pilot and co-pilot are both incapacitated. I've taken control of the aircraft." A pause. Then a disbelieving voice. Liam Bennett. Age?" He hesitated. 12. There was a sharp exhale. "Jesus Christ!" the controller muttered under his breath. "Okay, Liam, we've got you. Just hang in there. We're going to walk you through this." Liam let out a long breath, hands steadying on the controls. "Don't worry," he said. "I've got this." Back in the cabin, Ethan and Claire sat frozen, clutching the armrests. Claire's hand was pressed over her mouth, tears brimming in her eyes. Inside the cockpit, Liam moved with mechanical focus. Every adjustment, every input, muscle memory guided by study, practice, and instinct. He had always dreamed of this, but never like this. He gripped the yoke tighter and pulled gently. The plane resisted, groaning against the force of the dive. Alarms continued to flash. The whole cockpit rattled like it might rip apart. "Come on," Liam whispered through clenched teeth. He reached over and fine-tuned the trim. The yoke pulsed under his hands, slick with sweat. "Take it easy," the controller's voice coached. "Too much lift and you'll stall." Liam nodded and focused. Slowly, so slowly, the nose of the plane began to rise. The steep descent eased. Altitude stabilized. "I think I've got it," Liam muttered, half to himself. "You're doing great, Liam," came the reply. "Now let's lock in your altitude. You're at 20,000 feet and still falling. Adjust your climb angle to 5 degrees and set the altimeter for 30,000. Liam's fingers danced across the panel like he had done this 100 times. He recalculated pressure, speed, pitch, all in his head. Throttle, balanced, wings, level. Ascent, holding steady. In the cabin, a hush had fallen. The screaming had stopped. Eyes watched the ceiling anxiously, trying to feel... Was the plane still falling? A few whispered prayers still echoed. Others clutched loved ones in silence. Ethan's hands were white-knuckled around the armrests. Claire sat perfectly still, her eyes locked on the front of the plane. "Oh my God," Ethan murmured. "He's really doing it." Near the galley, Sophie stood frozen, her hand gripping the back of a seat. Through the narrow gap in the cockpit door, she watched Liam's small frame command the controls. Her mind could barely comprehend it. "Liam," the controller's voice returned. "You've stabilized. Great job. Next, we need to check your heading." Liam scanned the navigation panel. "I see it," he said. He tapped a key, and the screen lit up with a bright green flight path. "Good. Adjust your heading to 2-1 and hold it." Liam nodded. His hands flew over the rudder controls and stabilizer toggles. The aircraft straightened. The cabin vibrations softened. The sinking feeling was gone. Passengers started to lift their heads. Whispers of disbelief spread. They were no longer falling. The engines had steadied. The dive had stopped. And for the first time in what felt like hours, the passengers could breathe again. A collective exhale spread through the cabin. Soft cries, whispered prayers, stunned silence. A woman sobbed quietly into her hands. A man beside her murmured thanks under his breath, eyes still closed. In the cockpit, Sophie leaned forward just behind Liam. "How are you doing this?" she whispered. Liam's jaw tightened, his knuckles pale against the trembling yoke. His hands still shook, but his voice was calm, grounded. "I've read every commercial flight manual since I was 6, he said. "I've trained for this, over and over. I know how this aircraft works." Sophie shook her head slowly, as if trying to wake from a dream. "But this is real." "I know," Liam replied. He exhaled, long and focused, his grip steadying. "That's why I can't afford to mess this up." The controller's voice crackled through the headset. "Liam, we're rerouting you to a nearby airport with a long, open runway. We're prepping it now. You'll need to execute the approach manually. Can you handle that?" Liam's heart gave a hard thump, but he didn't hesitate. "I can do it." A new voice cut in, soft but urgent. "Liam." He turned to see Ethan, his father, standing in the cabin doorway. His voice was thick with emotion, fear, awe. "We believe in you, son." For a moment, Liam just stared back. Then he gave a small nod and turned back to the controls. "Let's land this plane," he said. Below them, the runway began to appear, long, gray, and shimmering in the afternoon haze. It stretched out like a lifeline. "Flight 237, you are on final approach," came the tower's voice. "Wind at 12 knots. Slight crosswind from the left. Adjust flaps to 30 degrees. Liam's hands moved with swift precision. He flipped the switches, adjusted the flaps, and narrowed his focus. The plane rocked slightly with the wind, but he countered smoothly. His breathing slowed. Every muscle in his body was tight with focus. Then, and alert. "Liam," the tower said again, more urgently. "We're getting a gear error. Can you confirm landing gear deployment?" Liam's eyes darted to the panel. A red light blinked. Ominous. The landing gear wasn't down. "No gear," he confirmed, voice tight. Red indicator. Nothing deployed. The controller didn't miss a beat. Too close to abort. Manual override. Look to your left. Silver lever near the throttle. Liam reached for it, pulled hard. A loud metallic clunk sounded beneath the aircraft. For a split second, hope. But the red light stayed on. "Still no gear," Liam said, his voice now edged with tension. In the cabin, passengers had begun to brace. Hands clenched armrests, eyes closed. Some quietly wept. Claire sat stiffly, silent tears streaming down her face. Beside her, Ethan held her hand, his forehead pressed against it. Across the aisle, Sophie had sunk to her knees, whispering something under her breath. "Oh, God," Ethan murmured. "He's just a kid." Sophie leaned over and placed a hand on his arm. "No," she said softly. "He's your son. And he can do this." In the cockpit, Liam steadied himself. His palms were damp, his chest tight. But his grip was strong. The controller's voice returned, "You're at 500 feet. If the gear doesn't lock, you'll have to perform a belly landing." "Copy." "I've got this," Liam said sharply. 300 feet. The runway was rushing up to meet them now, wide and real and terrifying. 200 feet. Liam checked the indicator again. Still red. He breathed deeply and adjusted the pitch, fighting the air pressure, feeling the resistance in the yoke. 100 feet. Muscles strained. Trim adjusted. Throttle balanced. He could feel the weight of the plane pressing back. 50 feet. "Come on," he whispered. Then, impact. The wheels slammed into the runway with a jarring, bone-rattling thud. The entire aircraft groaned. Metal screamed. The plane rocked violently from side to side. Liam gritted his teeth, forcing the yoke straight as the nose dipped forward, threatening to slam into the tarmac. He adjusted the rudder, eased the throttle, pulled back just enough. The plane wobbled, tilted, but didn't flip. Rubber screeched. Smoke trailed behind the wheels. The reverse thrusters kicked in with a roar. The aircraft fought every inch. It did not want to stop. But then, it did. With a final shudder, the plane slowed to a crawl. And then, silence. The aircraft shuddered one final time, then stopped. The nose tipped forward slightly, then steadied. And then there was silence. Deep, breathless silence. Liam sat frozen, his hands still locked onto the yoke. His chest rose and fell in sharp, uneven breaths. Sweat trickled down the side of his face. He couldn't move, couldn't speak. He was locked in the moment, disbelief tangled with exhaustion. Then, someone screamed. But it wasn't fear this time. It was relief. Joy. The cabin erupted into applause, cheers, cries of gratitude. One man at the back stood and shouted, "He did it!" Liam's arms dropped from the controls, his head falling back against the seat, as his body finally began to release the tension it had held like steel cables. His skin was pale, drenched with effort, but his heart was still beating steady. The cockpit door burst open. Ethan stumbled in first, his face white with shock, his eyes locked on his son. Liam. Liam lifted his head slowly, his expression dazed. "Dad?" Without another word, Ethan crossed the space in 2 steps and pulled his son into a fierce embrace. His hand cradled the back of Liam's head, his shoulders trembling. "You saved us," he whispered. "My God." "Liam, you saved us." Liam's breath caught in his throat as he collapsed into his father's arms. Moments later, Claire appeared behind them, wrapping her arms around them both, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I was so scared," she cried. I thought I was going to lose you." Liam's voice was quiet, but certain. I had to. Just then, Sophie stepped into the doorway, her eyes red but shining. "Liam," she said gently, "the tower wants to speak with you." Liam carefully separated from his parents and reached for the headset. His voice cracked slightly, but he spoke clearly. "This is Liam." The controller's voice returned, filled with emotion. "Liam, welcome back to solid ground, Captain." Liam managed a tired smile and rubbed his eyes. "Did I pass?" A deep chuckle echoed through the headset. "Kid, you just made history." Sophie handed him a bottle of water, her hands trembling. "Liam, you're incredible." He took it, shrugged weakly. "I've just read a lot of manuals." She smiled, voice thick with emotion. "Maybe it's time you start writing them." Outside the plane, emergency lights flashed red and blue through the windows as rescue teams surrounded the aircraft. Medics and personnel rushed down the aisles, checking on passengers, calming nerves. Liam stepped out of the cockpit, flanked by his parents. As he entered the main cabin, silence fell. Then, applause, first scattered, then overwhelming. People rose to their feet, many with tears in their eyes. Someone in first class started chanting, "Liam! Liam! Liam!" Liam's face flushed. He dipped his head, overwhelmed. But Ethan placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. "Take it in, son," he said, voice thick with pride. "You earned this." Liam lifted his head and looked around, at the faces filled with gratitude, wonder, relief. A soft smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "I guess I did," he whispered. Later that week, the east room of the Westbridge presidential mansion was bathed in afternoon sunlight. Heavy oak doors opened slowly, and Liam Bennett walked in, flanked by his mother and father. He held Claire's hand tightly as they approached the stage. Ethan's hand rested on his son's shoulder, guiding him forward. At the center of the stage stood the President of the United States, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit and crisp white shirt. His expression was warm, human, a sharp contrast to the grandeur of the surroundings. As Liam climbed the steps toward him, the room, a sea of senators, officials, military brass, and journalists, fell completely silent. Every eye was on the 12-year-old boy who had saved nearly 300 lives. Liam's heart thudded beneath his shirt, but his face remained composed, calm. The president opened a small velvet-lined box. Inside gleamed a gold medal, resting atop a silk cushion. "Liam Bennett," he began, voice clear and strong, "is not just a hero. He is a symbol of courage, of brilliance, and of calm under extraordinary pressure." Liam's breath caught in his throat. He looked up at the president, who smiled gently and continued, "What this young man achieved in the sky just days ago was nothing short of a miracle." When every trained professional aboard that aircraft became incapacitated, Liam stepped forward, without hesitation. At 12 years old, with no formal training, he took the controls of a commercial airliner cruising at 30,000 feet and brought it home. In the crowd, Claire reached for Ethan's hand. Her other hand clutched a tissue to her eyes. Tears streamed silently down her face. Ethan's jaw was clenched tight, but his other hand remained steady on Liam's shoulder. The president's voice filled the grand chamber, measured and full of reverence. "He did it with focus, courage, and extraordinary skill," he said, turning back to face Liam. His smile deepened. "Liam, you are an inspiration, not just to this country, but to the world." From the velvet-lined box, the president carefully lifted a gleaming gold medal. Liam stood motionless as the heavy symbol of heroism was draped around his neck. The cool metal touched his skin, and he instinctively lifted a hand to feel it, real, solid, earned. The applause came like a wave, not polite clapping, but thunderous, rising to the chandeliered ceilings. Generals stood, senators stood, reporters stood. Every person in the room rose in a collective ovation. Liam's cheeks flushed. He turned slightly, eyes searching for his parents. Ethan gave a small, proud nod. Claire was already crying, her hands clasped together, as if holding her heart in place. The president raised a hand, and slowly the applause faded. "But that's not all," he continued, his voice warm but commanding. Liam blinked. The president reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a white envelope. "For your incredible bravery and composure in the face of unimaginable pressure," he said, "the government of the United States would like to award you a $500,000 honorarium." Gasps swept through the audience. A few reporters dropped their pens. Liam's mouth opened slightly. He looked toward his parents again. Ethan was frozen, eyes wide. Claire's hand flew to her mouth. The president wasn't done, and he added, "We would also like to offer you a full scholarship to any aeronautical academy or university of your choosing." The cheers returned with renewed force. Flashbulbs popped. People wept. Photographers pressed in to capture the stunned boy standing at the center of history. Liam stood still, his heart hammering. It all felt impossible. The president leaned down slightly, speaking to him eye to eye. "You've got the makings of a great pilot, son," he said quietly, "and we want to make sure the skies stay within your reach." Liam opened his mouth. For a long moment, only air came out. Then finally, breathless but true, "Thank you. You've earned it," the president said, standing tall again. Ethan stepped forward first, sweeping Liam into a tight embrace. "I'm so proud of you," he whispered, voice shaking. Claire joined them seconds later, wrapping her arms around both of them. "I'm just glad everyone's okay," Liam murmured into his father's jacket. The president stood nearby, watching the family with a softened gaze. As applause continued to fill the room, Liam finally let himself smile. It bloomed slowly, spreading across his face with quiet pride. The fear, the pressure, the weight, all of it began to lift. He had done it. He had saved them all. Months later, the skies again. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long golden shadows across the tarmac at the Falcon Ridge Flight Academy. The sky above stretched wide and boundless, an endless sea of possibility. Liam Bennett stood at the edge of the private training runway, silhouetted against the light. He wore a crisp, navy blue pilot's uniform, the gold stripes on his sleeves shining subtly. He took a long breath, adjusting the brim of his cap. A few feet behind him, Ethan had one arm wrapped around Claire's shoulders. Her eyes shimmered with fresh tears as they watched their son. No longer the boy from that fateful flight, but something more. Liam turned toward a state-of-the-art flight simulator, sleek, polished, humming with readiness. His instructor, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and an aviator's calm presence, leaned casually against the frame. "You ready, Captain?" he asked, voice smooth with quiet pride. Liam's lips curled into a confident smile. He stepped up to the simulator. His shoes clicked softly on the metal floor. His fingers slid into place across the controls. Steady? Sure. The simulator powered up with a deep hum that vibrated through the air. "Let's see what you've got," the instructor said with a knowing smile. Liam's eyes narrowed in focus. The virtual runway stretched before him. He adjusted the throttle and set the flaps. His hands moved with an ease that felt like instinct. From the observation deck, Claire's hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling again. Ethan's arm tightened around her shoulders. The virtual plane lifted, smooth, clean, perfect. The screen slowly faded to black. The soft roar of simulated engines echoed in the background. Liam Bennett was no longer just the boy who saved a flight. He was becoming the pilot he was always meant to be.